Ah, we're supposed to be live. Um, I just want to show something before I begin. Hi, my name's Allan. For those of you on Facebook, watching us on Facebook Live, this is the Sunday morning online Gurdjieff group. Today I'm going to be talking about a question that was raised by Brian last week in terms of feeding the moon. But just give me 1 second. I just got to make sure, check a few things. One thing I wanted to talk about very briefly, if I can find it. Okay, just give me a second again. So there's this wonderful application that is, it's not really an application, it's a website. And the website is awakeningbell.org. You can just type in mindfulness bell DC for Washington, D.C. This is run by a group of Buddhists out in Washington, D.C. And as at the top, awakeningbell.org. And so you can have 2 different mindfulness bells. Let me just make sure I'm sharing. Just give me a second. I want to make sure I share the computer audio. So we've got this mindfulness bell. We can have a large bell, which I'm just ringing. Of course, if you notice on the left, this bell rings for 47 seconds. And you can set this to ring randomly, or you can set this to ring at specific times. So say every 15 minutes or every hour. That's the large bell. Let me stop the large bell. The small bell is this one. And that's actually quite loud. Let me turn that down a touch. That bell rings, it lasts approximately 32 seconds. I don't know if you can see the writing on the screen, but I would like the small bell to ring, and I had it set for every 7 minutes. And then I would like the big bell to ring. I wanted it to be really long. Usually it's set for half an hour, every 124 minutes. And so I've got this specifically set. I can do it random. So I would like a bell to ring randomly between 15 and 60 minutes. So you could time that in, so if you wanted it to ring randomly between 5 and 10 minutes, for instance. Reminder bell, you can also set it up so that it rings hourly, so that if you want to remind yourself on an hourly basis. And I have to say, I used this a lot more many, many years ago. Actually, I had to go and search for it because they keep on changing the URL for it. But I used it years ago. Whenever I was on the computer, I would have this. It's just a tab, a mindfulness bell tab on the computer. I would have it open, and I would have it set to periodically ring. I like to sort of between 5 and 10 minutes. I also like the random, and here we go again. So whenever it rang, and that is quite loud still. Whoops, that's a large bell. Or is it? I don't know which bell that is. So whenever it rang, I would just really stop, take a moment to center myself back into my body, take a moment to center myself back into my breath. And so whenever this mindfulness bell rang, I would use it as an opportunity to bring myself back here and now to this moment. Of course, I did some fairly advanced exercises when it happened. For instance, I would try to become mindful of my feelings, mindful of my body, mindful of my perceptions, trying to do as much as possible. Now, the other thing that I also found about the mindfulness bell is that we can grow habituated to it. And then it just plays in the background mechanically, and we don't really pay attention to it. So what I found that I ended up doing was every second day, or perhaps even every third day, I would turn the mindfulness bell on, so that I wasn't doing it all the time, so it didn't become a habitual part of my routine when I was on the computer. And again, as I said, whenever the mindfulness bell went off, I would take that as an opportunity to come back into myself, to become aware of myself, to become aware of my breathing, to self-remember. Now, I should also point out, I'll stop sharing that. I don't know if we'll get the sounds if it continues, but another thing we can also use, just give me a second. Again, if I can find it. There is an app. I don't know if you can, there it is. It's called the Mindfulness Bell. It's an app that you can pick up from Google Play. There must be an iPhone version of it. And again, this is an app that you can set to ring periodically. So wherever you have your phone might just ding in your pocket. An opportunity to bring yourself back into this moment. And so this one, you can also set up output, you can set up the active times, you can do all of that. And so you can carry your phone with you throughout the day. And Mr. Gurdjieff talked about reminding factors. So factors, different things that we can bring into our life that can help us to awaken more frequently, or to begin to awaken. One of the best things for the beginner who wants to practice mindfulness is to find a mindfulness group. It's easier to do this with a group of people. There's some kind of synergy, some kind of entrainment property that happens when you're with a group of 10 or 15 or 20 people, and you're all focusing on the same thing at the same time. Within the groups that I have on Tuesday evening, every now and again, I like to remind them that, you know, as we become aware of our right shoulder, and then our right upper arm, and then our right elbow, it's something that we are all collectively doing at the same time. And there is a resonance that comes from doing it with a group of people. It also makes it easier. It kind of keeps us more in line, more on track. We are less likely to just sort of forget about it and fall away. So, you know, joining a community can really help. Even just going, for instance, to a Buddhist community, maybe they have a by donation free, open group mindfulness meditation one night a week can be very useful. I know that here in Toronto, we've got a number of different Buddhist centers that offer mindfulness sittings. There's one called the Shambhala Center, which is right near a subway, and I've gone to that one a few times just to sit quietly. I mean, in the Shambhala Center, you sit, you focus on your breath and being as mindful as possible for half an hour. Then you get up and walk around for 5 minutes, and then you do it again for another half an hour, and then that's the end of the session. And then you can go have tea with the participants, or even just go home. There is a synergy, there is a power that comes from doing this in groups, but the ultimate goal is to be mindful wherever we are. Mr. Gurdjieff said, remember yourself always and everywhere. And that was an injunction to be as mindful, to be as present, to be as here in our body, in this particular place, as fully engaged with this present moment as we can. So let's just segue into a mindfulness exercise. I've got the mindfulness bell to ring approximately every 7 minutes. I don't know now if, because I've taken it off my screen, it's still on my computer, if you will be able to hear it. I will ask if you can hear it, and just, raise your hand or something if you can. If not, I'll have to just turn it off in my end, or I'll find it too distracting. But I've got it so that it's going to ring every 7 minutes. So throughout this meeting, whenever it rings, just, silently bring yourself back to yourself. So inner work. We do this inner work for ourselves. We also do this inner work for humanity, and we do this inner work for the earth herself. Can you hear that, the bell? No. Okay. It has to be, I guess, shared screen. I guess I'll just turn that off. Okay. So we do this work for ourselves. We do this work for our fellow human being, and we do this work for the earth herself. So every time we become mindful, every time we focus on our breath, every time we focus on our breathing, on our body, on the air that touches our face, our clothing, the sensation of self, every time we focus on becoming mindful of what we can see, hear, smell, taste, anytime we become mindful of what we are feeling, that we are not just these discrete, limited organisms. We're not just working for ourselves, that this has an impact on our fellow human beings and an impact on the earth herself. And it's all about raising vibrations and elevating our vibrations. And I think they're starting to vacuum upstairs. Hopefully they won't do it too long when they're right above me. I don't have anything set up, an exercise to do right now, but I can hear the vacuuming just starting far away. So I'd like to just offer an apology for that vacuum. Let's all just begin by trying to become aware of our breath, by trying to become aware of our breathing, sensing the air as it flows in through our nose, nasal cavity, back of mouth, throat, down past our vocal cords into our lungs and back out again. And then let's attempt to become aware of the movement of the various muscles involved in breathing, our diaphragm, our abdomen, the muscles between our ribs. And then let's become aware that as we are breathing, when we breathe in, we're feeding our body, and as we breathe out, we are cleansing our body. So breathing and air, according to Mr. Gurdjieff, is the second being food. There's the food we eat in our mouth, and then there's the food we breathe, is the second being food. So just become aware of your breathing, become aware of your body breathing, become aware of breathing in, and then breathing out. Really attempt to bring yourself back into your body as fully as you can, as fully into the sensation of air flowing in, as fully into the movement of the muscles, as fully into the awareness of your entire body breathing. Really try to ground yourself in your physical body. And then let's do Mr. Gurdjieff's filling exercise. As a vessel fills with warm golden honey, so too can we fill with sensation. So it's almost like we're pouring a vessel of golden honey filled with sensation into our body. And slowly our body fills up with sensation. So imagine filling with sensation in your feet. So sensing your feet from the soles of your feet to the top of your feet, from your toes to your heels. And then imagine filling with sensation from your feet up to your ankles, up through your lower legs, up to your knees, filling with sensation up through your upper legs to your hips, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet all the way up slowly through your torso, so through your lower torso, your midriff, solar plexus, middle torso, your chest, upper back, upper torso, all the way to your shoulders. And then, while remaining aware of your body from the bottom of your feet to your shoulders, allow your hands and arms to slowly fill with sensation as well. So your fingers, hands, wrists, up through your lower arms, elbows, up through your upper arms to your shoulders, filling with sensation from the bottom of your feet all the way up through your shoulders, and then filling with sensation up through your neck, and then up through your head, filling your whole skull with sensation, your neck, your shoulders, your torso, your arms, your legs. Really sense your entire body as one organic whole. Sense your body from the bottom of your feet all the way to the top of your head. Sense your whole body breathing. Try to develop this awareness, this sensation of self. And then I would like you to become aware of your right arm. And I would like you to try to become aware simply of the flesh in your right arm, the flesh in your right upper arm, lower arm, the flesh in your hands, the flesh in your fingers. And then move down to your right leg. Become aware of the flesh in your upper leg, the flesh in your lower leg, the flesh in your feet, your toes. And then move to your left leg and become aware of the flesh in your left leg. Let's start with the feet, the toes, the lower leg, the upper leg. Aware of all of the flesh in your left leg. And then become aware of the flesh in your left arm, starting with your fingers, your hands, moving up your wrist, your elbow, to your shoulders. Trying to become aware of all of the flesh in your limbs. And then try to become aware of the flesh from your pelvic region all the way up to the top of your head. So try to become aware of the flesh in your lower torso, your middle torso, your chest, your upper back, your upper torso. Try to become aware of the flesh in your neck, the flesh in your head, in your skull, even the flesh composing the gray matter in your skull. Then try to develop a sensation of the flesh in your whole body. And then let's return to the right arm and try to become aware of the bones in your right arm. Let's start with the upper arm. Try to become aware of the bone in the upper arm, then the elbow, and then the bones in the lower arms, and the bones in the wrists, and the bones in the hands and fingers. And then try to become aware of the bones in the right leg, so the upper thigh bone, the knees. Try to become aware of the two bones in the lower legs. Try to become aware of the bones in your feet, the toes, the various joints and bones in your right foot. And then moving over to your left foot, try to become aware of the bones in your left foot. And then moving up your left leg into your lower leg, become aware of the two bones in your lower leg. And then try to become aware of your thigh bone. And then moving to your left hand, try to become aware of the bones in your left hand. Try to become aware of the bones in your left wrist and moving up your left arm. The bones moving up your lower arm to your elbow, to your upper arm, to your shoulder. And then try to become aware of the bones in all four of your limbs. And then move your awareness to your pelvic bone, your hip bone. Move it to the sacral bones. Move it to the lower part, the lumbar bones for your spine and your lower back. The thoracic vertebrae in your upper back. Become aware of your shoulder blades. Become aware of your rib cage. Become aware of your breastbone, your collarbone, the vertebrae in your upper back, the cervical vertebrae. Then try to become aware of your jawbone, your facial bone where your upper teeth are implanted. And then try to become aware of the various bones in your skull, the frontal bone, the temporal bones at the side, the parietal bone at the top, and then the occipital bone at the back. And then for the next level, we're going to try to become aware of the marrow within our bones. Now we have two different kinds of marrow. We have the yellow marrow that helps to produce white blood cells, and the red marrow that helps to produce red blood cells. The yellow marrow is located in our long bones. So the primary source of the yellow marrow in our body is within our limbs. So try to become aware of the yellow marrow in your right arm. So the upper arm and the lower arm. Try to become aware of the marrow, the yellow marrow within the bones, the long bones in your right arm, the upper arm and the lower arm. And then try to become aware of the yellow marrow in your right leg, the upper leg and the lower leg. And then try to become aware of the yellow marrow in your left lower leg and upper leg. And then try to become aware of the yellow marrow in your left arm, the lower arm, and then the upper arm. And then try to become aware. Try to sense as best you can the yellow marrow within all of your limbs. And then move to your pelvic bone and try to become aware of the red marrow in your pelvic bone. And try to become aware of the red marrow that in the vertebrae of your spine. And I'm sorry about them vacuuming upstairs, but try to become aware of the red marrow in your shoulder blades, the red marrow in your rib cage, the red marrow in your breastbone, the red marrow in your collarbone, the red marrow in your cervical vertebrae, and then try to become aware of the red marrow in your jaw, the red marrow in your facial bones with your upper teeth, where your upper teeth are, the red marrow in your skull bones, the frontal bone, the temporal bones at the sides, the parietal bone at the top, the occipital bone at the back. Try to become aware of all of the red marrow in your body. Then just try to become aware of all of the marrow, yellow and red, in your limbs and within all of your bones. Try to sense this marrow. Within the Bible, within the Old Testament, flesh, bones, and marrow were both metaphors and, in a sense, not metaphors for different levels and states of awareness. The flesh is the mechanical state. St. Paul used the word soma, which means body. To become aware of the bones. This is St. Paul's psyche. In the Old Testament, it's actually, the term is ruach. And Ezekiel's valley of dry bones, where God says, breathe life into these bones. The actual word that he's using for breath is ruach. And this is the self at World 24. This is the mindful, self-reflective self. There's something very important about the spinal column and the development of the spinal column and the development of bones that is connected to the personal consciousness, to the self-reflective level. And then, you know, in the New Testament, St. Paul used soma, psyche, pneuma. Pneuma meant spirit. Psyche was translated probably incorrectly as soul. And soma was body. In the Old Testament, it's nephesh, the soul that dwells within flesh. And then ruach, the soul that dwells within bones. And then neshama, the soul that dwells within our marrow. And neshama is World 12. It represents the awakened state. So these are the three levels that we normally work in. So become aware of the flesh in your body. Become aware of the bones in your body. And then become aware of the marrow in your body. Moving deeper and deeper and deeper inwards into this deeper, more inward sense of sensation. And then just allow your attention to rest. Allow your attention to rest and collect your atmosphere around you. We have an atmosphere just like the earth has an atmosphere, and our atmosphere can be dispersed into different directions. It can be dispersed for miles, hundreds, thousands of miles, depending on what's going on within us. Most people live with their atmosphere dispersed. They don't understand the importance of collecting our atmosphere, bringing it close to ourselves. Mr. Gurdjieff said that this is how we should end formal inner work, by collecting our atmosphere to about a meter, meter and a half around us, and then keeping our atmosphere still, calm, tranquil. We can mess it up with our thoughts. We can mess it up with sensations. We can mess it up with feelings. So to keep our thoughts tranquil, to keep our sensations tranquil, to keep our feelings tranquil, to keep this atmosphere tranquil. And in a moment, I'm going to count from 1 up to 3. And when I get to 3, breathe it in. And then as you breathe out, imagine that something remains. 1, 2, 3. Breathe your atmosphere in. And then as you breathe your atmosphere out, imagine that something remains. Something that goes to shape, to crystallize, to form your inner being. And then let's just finish with an affirmation. May results from this exercise, and just repeat that silently in your mind, may results from this exercise be transubstantiated within me for my being. And then just slowly come back and return. Any comments about the inner work? Any observations? Anything you'd like to share? Frustrations, joys, triumphs?
The last week you said that the identification is the enemy of self-remembering.
Yeah.
And that popped up a couple times last week, and which could be really helpful. Like to be able to not identify with things, I think is, even just that idea is really important.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, identification steals the same energy as self-remembering. They're both fueled by hydrogen-24, but identification it's sort of a malignant formation and misuse of hydrogen-24 that blocks any further growth or development. But that's a whole massive topic in itself. Today, you know, I was going to talk about the moon, which is the question that Brian asked last week. As I mentioned last week, someone once, just not too long ago, sent me a link to a Sam Harris video where he briefly mentions Gurdjieff. And the 2 minutes in the video or audio that he mentions Mr. Gurdjieff it's obvious that he has not read Mr. Gurdjieff. It's obvious that he's not done any kind of real, even superficial exploration of Mr. Gurdjieff, that he simply Googled it and found something that he thought was laughable. And the problem is that if you Google Gurdjieff and Mr. Gurdjieff, you will inevitably encounter this. And a lot of people, they read this one statement, they think, well, this guy's just full of it. You know, this is the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. We don't even have to bother exploring him. And so they don't even make an attempt to understand what they are belittling. Now, the importance of the moon and understanding the connection between these teachings and the moon, it is necessary to go back to Mr. Gurdjieff's, so to speak, creation story. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff told this story, you know, well over 100 years ago. And modern science is starting to agree with it, particularly after the Apollo astronauts came back from the moon with soil samples and rocks and stuff from the moon. And what they found, and what it's pretty conclusive now, is that the moon came from the earth. And I love the way Mr. Gurdjieff put it, and I love J.G. Bennett's slight reflection on it. Mr. Gurdjieff said that the people responsible for the maintenance of the universe, or the beings, the high beings responsible for the maintenance of the universe, made a mistake. And J.G. Bennett loved this idea. He said, even really, 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 really high beings are capable of making mistakes. So even the archangels that are responsible, allegedly, for running the universe can make mistakes. And one of them made a mistake. They didn't watch what was going on in our universe. And a massive comet hit the earth and gouged out the moon. And we now know that this is true. We know that this happened approximately 4 billion years ago. And so the earth and the moon are really created from a single substance. The moon didn't come into the earth's orbit and stay there. The moon was gouged out of the earth, and every rotation it moves slightly farther away. And, you know, I think like in 100,000 or 1,000,000 years, it's going to be quite far away, because it started out as part of the earth. And Mr. Gurdjieff talks about the ray of creation, the way the universe was formed. And the universe was formed starting with the absolute. And this is an involution downwards. So from the absolute to all worlds, to all suns, to our sun, to our planetary system, to our Earth. And according to Mr. Gurdjieff, this is how it was supposed to be set up. Let me just bring up a diagram that will illustrate this. So there's a sequence of the way everything evolved. And there's an order to this. The numbers are all important. The numbers are all mean everything, but the absolute, all worlds, all sun, our planets, the Earth, and then the moon. And the way initially it had been set up was that the growing end of this ray of creation that we are on was supposed to end with the Earth. But as a result of that miscalculation that allowed that massive comet to hit the Earth, the moon was gouged out of the Earth, and our ray of creation was extended by that one extra link. And according to Mr. Gurdjieff, this is the source of all of the problems on this planet. Because as a result of that, organic life on Earth was required to come and fill in the gap, to be an accumulator, to send a certain degree or a certain type of energy to the moon, to feed the moon. And so the moon is world 96. And so that's one level below the mechanical state of world 48, where we are little more than machines and automatons. The next level up, world 24, is the realm of personal consciousness, where we can become aware of our body, become aware of our breathing, become aware of the touch of clothing, the air that touches our face, gravity. That's fueled, this sensation of self, this awareness of things happening here and now in this moment is fueled by hydrogen 24. It's fueled by that very refined energy. The mechanical realm where we reach for door handles without thinking, where we always step up with the same leg on the first step, where we always put the same leg first into our pants when we wake up in the morning, that realm where we live sort of in habitual automatic pilot, that's fueled by hydrogen 24. The moon is fueled by hydrogen 96. And so there are a number of different ways we can explore this. Just give me a second again. Let me pull up another diagram. One that hopefully you're getting familiar with. Okay, let me just share this. So in this diagram, let me just try and extend it slightly over. The alchemy of human transformation. I spent a lot of time focusing on the top, on the specific molecules involved, on the nature of the growth of our inner being, and you can see that there really is a growth of our being from the waking state, or state of waking sleep. The state of waking sleep is to be centered in the mechanical realm of world 48. When we become aware of ourselves, of our breath, of our body, of our breathing, that's the first conscious shock. It's stepping up into the state of personal consciousness. And we can see that expansion of our being, particularly at the higher, more inward levels. And then as we move over to the awakened state, on the very right-hand side, there's an even further growth at the higher levels. Now, if we look at the squares, and I guess some of the definition doesn't come out properly in the middle ones, but the square on the left side represents mechanical man. This is the human being. Let me see if I can just get a draw. So this is, oops, I don't know what. This is human being, centered in world 48. But Mr. Gurdjieff said that we are three-story beings. We're much more than three-story beings. But in order to analyze us, we need to find out the center of gravity of our psychic life and then become aware of the level above and the level below. And using these three sort of as a triangulation, we can begin to understand ourselves. So the person, the normal mechanical human being centered in world 48, also has access to world 24. So this is why you can go to a normal person who's in a state of waking sleep and say, can you become aware of your breath? Can you become aware of the air flowing in and out of your nostrils, which is a world 24 phenomenon? And of course they can. And they can step up to that state, but only briefly. But they also have access to world 96, to the realm below the mechanical state. And so if we understand that each level above or each level below, that there is an increase, a doubling or a halving. For instance, world 24 is twice as intelligent as world 48, which is twice as intelligent as world 96. World 24 is twice as vibrant as world 48, which is twice as vibrant as world 96. So we can begin to get a sense. We cannot observe ourselves really at the level of world 48. When we're in that realm, by definition, we are machines and we can't observe ourselves. So it becomes even harder to observe ourselves when we are in world 96. It's twice as dense, twice as stupid, twice as dark and heavy as the normal mechanical realm. But because a normal person has access to the story above and the story below, it's very possible, and for most people, they spend, far more than they should feeding the moon. Now, here, there's something I want to point out, and something that Mr. Gurdjieff also points out. He said that it is possible for us, not as a species, but for us as individuals to liberate ourselves from the moon. And if we look over to the middle of this diagram, the first conscious shock, someone who is centered in the realm of personal consciousness, in the realm of mindful awareness. When you get centered in that realm, your high then becomes the awakened state, hydrogen 12, and your low is the mechanical state. So you can still exhibit very mechanical behavior, but when you make it up and you move this whole step upwards, you no longer feed the moon at your lowest level. So, when we can draw a line, the moon, it doesn't feed the higher two. It's only the lowest man, the mechanical man, the machine-like man at their lowest level. we feed the moon, or they feed the moon. Now we can come up here to these numbers up in the alchemy of human transformation, and we can look at 96, and then we can draw a sort of boundary around it. Now, just because we have the dough of impressions ending here, it doesn't really end here. What happens is thoughts can go down, and so thoughts can move downwards. So can emotions. So there are different ways we can feed the moon. But if we understand, for instance, in the octave of food, what these different points represent, it becomes really interesting. I forget the page number, but in Beelzebub Tales to his grandson, Mr. Gurdjieff, actually links each of these notes on the very left side of the octave of food to specific parts of the body. The dough here is when food enters into the mouth. So dough occurs in the mouth. It occurs when the food we eat mixes with the higher carbon, the saliva in our mouth and the chewing, and then it moves up to Ray 348, which then occurs, this transformation occurs in our stomach. Then the Me 192, that transformation occurs in our duodenum, and then Fa 96. And I'm just really circling this over here. Mr. Gurdjieff, and this won't be a surprise, Mr. Gurdjieff said that Fa 96 is transformed in our liver. And if any of you are aware of the connection between different things within the body, the liver is the seat of anger. People who have liver problems often have extreme anger issues. Years ago, I met someone who had had a liver transplant, and I asked him about anger, and he was a very angry person, and he had been an angry person his whole life, and even after the liver transplant, he was angry. So Fa 96, the liver, the connection with anger. The way I sort of imagine it in my mind, and I'll just, or I'll keep this up, or no, I won't. I'll just bring it back to our full screen. The way I imagine it in my mind is that there are certain lose it emotions. Homicidal rage, road rage, extreme anger, the emotion that we need to access in order to go and kill another person. Or, it's becoming more and more manifest within cars these days. I'd never heard of the term road rage until the late 90s. And, the more it's talked about, the more prevalent it becomes. But people taking tire irons and smashing windows of other drivers and getting really upset at them is an aspect of feeding the moon. That's probably one that we can relate to best in our society. But for those people, for instance, who've been in war zones, who've actually killed other people, the killing of other people, wars is actually probably the number one example of feeding the moon on this planet. Getting into that rage where you want to kill the enemy, where you are prepared to kill the enemy, with your hands and fingers if you have to. And, we can extrapolate from this arguments where you just lose it. You lose any kind of an awareness, and you kind of come out of it as if coming out from a fog later on. And, you know, you can't believe that was you, and how could you react that way? And a lot of good people have been caught up in this. Something in them snaps, and then they have 5 minutes of feeding the moon that potentially affects the rest of their life. They could end up in jail, or they could lose a job, or whatever. They could lose relationships. And then there are some people who, within the context of relationships, they feed the moon fairly regularly. The violent partners who hit their partners, who scream, who get really angry, who lose it, are feeding the moon. But and here, another thing to point out is, you know, the connection between the word moon and the word lunacy and the word lunatic. Lunacy, luna, the moon, lunatic, the moon. So when we are suffering from lunacy, when we are lunatics, we're also feeding the moon. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff said that it's one of the primary purposes of life on planet Earth to feed the moon. That life on planet Earth actually arose specifically to feed the moon. And we know that the moon was gouged out of the Earth approximately 4 billion years ago, and that sometime in the next 200 million years, life began to arise on planet Earth. We also know that the moon and the tides are essential for life on Earth. If the moon disappeared tomorrow, if it was vaporized, life on Earth wouldn't survive. That there's something about the moon's effect on the tides, on the water, on the Earth, that is integral to life. And there are a lot of research papers now being done, and theories being put forward by reputable scientists about how the moon is like a pendulum, and the tides and the oceans and the regulation and the moon cycle and the woman's fertility cycle, the cycle of her periods, and all of these are all connected, so that the moon is absolutely instrumental in the maintaining of life on Earth. But it's really the reverse. Life on Earth arose to help feed the moon, to extend the ray of creation by that one point. But so organic life on Earth feeds the moon. It's like it collects the energy from the sun, from the planetary realm. It's like a way station for this energy, and the energy then gets exported to the moon. And if we went back to the original diagram that I just showed, world 96 is the level of invertebrates. So it's the level of lobsters and oysters and life that doesn't have the spinal column, the fleshy life that doesn't have the spinal column and yet is beyond the realm above the plants. So there's a specific level of organic life on planet Earth, level 96, that goes to feed the moon. And Mr. Gurdjieff said that, if the moon disappeared, life would cease on the Earth. And if life on Earth ceased, it would have dramatic effect on the moon, but not just the moon, but the whole ray of creation that we exist on. So the moon needs to be maintained. It needs to be supported. And organic life on Earth helps to support the moon. Now, Mr. Gurdjieff also said that organic life on Earth also has another purpose, and that there's an evolving dimension to organic life on Earth. And he said that humanity is the evolving end of organic life on Earth, and he implied that people on the mystical path are the evolving end of humanity. He didn't use people on the mystical path, but he said that there's a small percentage of humans who are part of the evolving end of humanity, which is the evolving end of organic life. And he said that if humanity begins to degenerate, that it will be wiped out, because humanity will then no longer be needed and organic life will have to figure something else out. Now, this is a roundabout way of saying something that Mr. Gurdjieff also said. He said that part of our liberation is our liberation from the moon. And the way we liberate ourselves from the moon is we grow our being. And as we grow our being at higher and higher levels, or more inward levels, we break free from the clutches of the moon. So coming back to that, I'm going to just pull up that diagram again. So the person who's managed to lift their being by a whole order and to be centered in world 24 no longer feeds the moon. I'm just trying to see, whoops, I'm just trying to get my pen back. There it is, or is it? Let's see what Spotlight does. So, whoops. So, mechanical man, at their lowest, they feed the moon. When they get angry, certain emotions. As we move up, as we transform higher and higher levels of energies, we begin to grow our being on an inward level. We begin to develop the Kesdjan body at first, which is the middle. You know, the full representation of the middle is the development of the Kesdjan body. And then the difference on the right-hand side is the development of the higher being body. So as we begin to move up, as we begin to grow our inner being, as we begin to raise the level of our being, we begin to move the center of our being up. And so a person who exists in the mindful state at the level of personal consciousness has escaped and has liberated themselves from the moon. In other words, they don't experience those homicidal emotions. They don't experience that rage. And here I should also add that our center, the center of gravity of our inner being can slide up and it can slide down. So it is possible for someone who is personally conscious, a mindful man who has solidified themselves at that level. You know, perhaps they didn't get a proper sleep, perhaps they didn't eat, maybe they were out drinking the night before, who knows, whatever. It's very possible for them to slip back down momentarily and experience those lower states. So this is, you know, you don't move up and you never have to worry about it again. It's possible to, you know, something can push you down, and it's also possible that things can push you up. So people who exist on the very left in the mechanical state can experience moments of awakening, that these things can happen, and they're more like accidents and as a result of external shocks in our environment than they are, you know, a property of our being. But so to transform a higher energy, we become of a higher service to this planet. We become of a higher service to organic life. As we begin to transform these higher and higher energies, we are evolving. So in this system, evolution has a purpose. There is a structure to evolution that moves from the metals to the minerals to the plants to the invertebrates to the vertebrates to the three levels of man. As we move up the evolutionary scale, we actually perform a higher service. And as Mr. Gurdjieff also said, organic life on planet Earth, the evolving part of organic life is humanity, and then there is an evolving part of humanity, which, in my understanding, are the mystics of this planet, are the people who are striving to become more personally conscious, more mindful, and then striving to awaken. And Mr. Gurdjieff said that if we stop, if there was no one striving to do this, our species itself would no longer be needed and it would go extinct. So to understanding this connection between the moon, between the level 96 down in the very left-hand corner is where the normal person feeds the moon. And as we move up, and then as we move up again, we begin to serve different purposes. And as we move to the middle level, to personal consciousness, to being centered in World 24, we no longer feed the moon. So understanding this background about the moon, this connection with energies, with levels of consciousness, with levels of awareness, we can begin to understand what he means by this whole process. I'm going to pull up another diagram. Whoops, just a second. That can also help explain this a little better. Oops, that's the wrong one. Just give me 1 second now. The purpose and significance of organic life on Earth. That's what I got this title. This is part of a series, and the purpose and significance of organic life on Earth is to feed and to transform energies. And so there's this growing chain of rising energies that starts with the metals. The metals are the first life form, then up to the minerals, and the metals are at the level of 768, which is the level that food comes in. Minerals are at level 384, plants at 192. And I've expanded it slightly, bacteria, plankton, soil, plants, fruits. Then we get to World 96, which is the realm of the moon. Crustaceans, oysters, insects, worms, jellyfish. So things without a spinal column. And then we get up to the vertebrates, World 48. So we can understand World 96 is the feeding of the moon. It's the part of our being that we share with the crustaceans, the oysters, the insects, the worms, the jellyfish. We still have that part that exists within us. For a lot of people, let's try and, I'm not sure why, there it is. For a lot of people, they can say that this is the extent of their being, this level. At the highest, they can be mindful, but at their center, vertebrates, and at their lowest level, the invertebrates. Other people, as they awaken, they tap into higher and higher levels. So ultimately, if we understand this diagram, if we understand all of the diagrams, I didn't put 3 and 1 here, but we could include, 3 up at the top and 1. And this shows us, the old medieval Christian belief that, we are supposed to be links between heaven and earth. And the only species that can actually become that link are humans. And somehow by creating and growing ourselves at higher and higher levels, we move upwards. And we help humanity and we help organic life on planet Earth as we move upwards. So there's the dichotomy. On the one hand, feeding the moon. This is, 96% of humanity, and I'm guessing with that percentage, most of humanity, not all the time, but they feed the moon. That's the dichotomy in the one hand. And the other hand is to connect with the highest energies of creation, to become a conduit, to become, a place those energies can flow down. And so we have to slowly, step by step, by step, by step, raise and grow our being at the higher levels so that we can actually fulfill one of the functions of humanity, being the evolving end of organic life on planet Earth. So this is, it's a fairly in-depth, fairly complex explanation of feeding the moon. If Sam Harris had understood this, he probably wouldn't even have mentioned Gurdjieff in that film, putting him down, saying, he says that humans feed the moon, so the system is ridiculous. Understanding it in its psychological dimensions and its cosmological dimensions. And here again, something I've talked about before, Mr. Gurdjieff said, it is impossible to just study psychology. Just as it is impossible to just study cosmology. Psychology is understood in the context of cosmology, and cosmology is understood in the context of psychology. So to understand ourselves, we have to understand the universe. And to understand the universe, we have to understand ourselves. And this brings us back to that ancient formula, know thyself. And people are not even aware this is a formula, and they're not even aware, they don't even know the proper formula. They just quote know thyself and say it could be from Socrates or the temple, one of the temples in Greece. But the phrase is actually Egyptian and probably much older, and it's know thyself and thou shalt know the gods in the universe. But it's a formula. Know the gods in the universe, and thou shalt know thyself. We can approach it from two ways. But what it's really talking about is the interrelation and the connection between cosmology and psychology. So in order to understand what feeding the moon means, we have to understand the ray of creation. We have to understand the growth and purpose of evolution, the evolution of organic life on Earth. We have to understand the ultimate purpose of our species. We have to understand where our species fits into the cosmos and all of these things in order for this to begin to make sense. But when we start putting all of these pieces together, it begins to make sense. And we begin to understand where we ourselves fit in. And then we can begin to understand that if you get into a rage, I had a client a couple of days ago who falls into rage, and he asked me, do you ever rage? Do you ever experience that rage? And I recalled a time around the age of 11 or 12 when I got so mad I destroyed everything in my bedroom. And then at the end of that, I thought, I liked this, I liked that. Why did I destroy this? And I started to control my rage from that moment. Had a lot of rage in me in my childhood. It was the way I stopped my brother and sister from bullying me. And so it's something that I've actually been working on since about the age of 11 or 12 without realizing it. But whenever you get into that state, you've lost it, you lose it. And at the potential, you can begin to try to observe yourself, to think about that manifestation, what it was that caused that, to begin to reflect on how when you lost it in that moment of rage, you were feeding the moon, that you were centered in world 96, creating that energy that feeds the moon. And we've all experienced that. As human beings, we've all experienced that level of rage. And we can slip down and in a brief moment, re-experience it, no matter how high we are. So it's part of the human experience, and it's one of those things that we must strive to stop doing. We no longer want to feed the moon. Let rest of humanity feed the moon. For ourselves, let's become the evolving part of humanity, which is the evolving part of organic life on planet Earth, to serve that other purpose rather than feeding the moon. So any comments, any questions on this?
Allan, one thing that comes to mind is if the moon was created by accident, but we need the moon for the purposes of the Earth, I don't understand that dichotomy.
Well, no, before the moon was created, the Earth was the end of the ray of creation. So the Earth doesn't need or didn't need the moon. The Earth was supposed to be an endpoint. So the ray of creation extended down to the Earth. And then I'm not sure what the Earth's particular destiny was at that point. But when the moon was gouged out of the Earth, organic life was required to feed the moon. A metaphor that I came up with years ago was that the Earth gave birth to the moon, so to speak. And organic life on planet Earth are the milk ducts and the nutrients that Mother Earth is using to feed the moon. Now, the thing is, the moon is absolutely essential for organic life on planet Earth. The movement of the tides, the movement of the oceans, the swaying regulatory power of the moon. It's even been theorized that it was the tides that caused the minerals and the metals to erode out of the rocks and enter into the water so that they could become sort of the bodies and the food for the first life that arose on planet Earth. And without the erosion of the moon, life, the minerals and the metals wouldn't have been, deposited in the waters and whatever, so that when life arose, it could feed on them. What this means is that organic life on planet Earth is absolutely dependent on the moon. If the moon, Mr. Gurdjieff said this, if the moon disappeared, organic life would cease on planet Earth. But planet Earth herself would not cease. He's just talking about that really, really incredibly tiny film, that layer of organic life that surrounds the outside of planet Earth. So life on Earth is absolutely dependent on the moon. If the moon ceased, we would die. Even though I've talked about, the upper and lower stories and looking at our being as a three-story being, the center of gravity of our psychic life, and then the floor above and the floor below. And for a normal person, their floor below is the feeding of the moon. We are really apartment stories. So at the ground floor, we are metals, and then we are minerals. Second floor, third floor, plants. Fourth floor, invertebrates. Now, you can't have an apartment building and knock out the fourth floor and expect it to stand. We are composed, World 96, the elements of World 96 are essential for us. If World 96 ceased to exist, if the moon was no longer here, there would be this massive dislocation within us and we would die. But the earth would still exist, the earth herself. So we've got to differentiate between the earth and organic life, that small film on the surface of the earth, the small film, organic life on earth. Part of the radiations that we create serve to feed the moon, that organic life on planet Earth creates. So does that help answer that question?
Yes, it still seems if it was an accident, and then we're all, what can I call it? The result of that accident. It's just a very interesting concept.
Sorry, I just forgot to plug my computer in and it tells me I'm running out of power. The law of accident. I have a friend who says everything is destined. Everything that happens arises as a result of fate. And a big part of the Gurdjieff Teachings is the recognition and understanding of the law of accident. The law of accident is very instrumental within our lives. Sometimes we're meant to meet someone, and sometimes we just meet people. And, my friend says, everyone you meet, you're supposed to meet. And under the system, the law of accident operates. So even at those higher levels. Now, it gets even more complex. Because the result of organic life on Earth, because of the whole process of the development, something actually went wrong. According to Mr. Gurdjieff's creation myth, one of the higher beings, alleged archangels responsible, thought that, when we got to the development of humanity, we could screw this whole process right up. And so he advocated, and eventually they all agreed to have something implanted in our species. And Mr. Gurdjieff uses the word bipedal, so it was probably when our species began to walk upright. And Mr. Gurdjieff called it the organ kunda buffer, which makes us see everything topsy-turvy. And it makes us, subjective, and it's really the development of our ego, and aren't we special, and I'm so good, and the being that implanted that within us thought that if we just developed without it, and we realized that we were really little more than cattle, that we are here to provide food, and we provide a major form of food when we die, to realize that we were just farmed, so to speak, that we would commit suicide. And so the organ kunda buffer was put into our ancestors so that we didn't develop this awareness. We were too self-centered, too concerned with ourselves to pay attention to the cosmological dimensions of our being. And so as a result, things could proceed. And then when that period had passed, they removed the organ kunda buffer. But what they didn't take into account, another aspect of accident, the law of accident, was they didn't realize that, that there were certain properties, a result that came from the organ kunda buffer that became inherent and that we passed down, through the generations. And this is where he calls it the consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer. And this is the big thing that imperils our species. The organ kunda buffer imperils our planet. My understanding of the organ kunda buffer is the ego, that subjective me, my, mine, turns the world topsy-turvy. I've talked about the difference between subjective and objective, personal and impersonal. So the subjective, personal, me, my, mine, ego, now has become the most dangerous thing within our species, and potentially the most dangerous thing on planet Earth, and potentially the most dangerous thing within this whole ray of creation. because if the earth messes up, it messes up the ray of creation upwards and downwards. And so this was why Mr. Gurdjieff said that, you know, our endlessness sent messenger after messenger to attempt to correct this problem. And, you know, he talked about, you know, Moses, the Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, Saint Lama, various saints, various messengers that were sent down to try and correct this fault that exists within us. The organ kunda, or the consequences, because the organ kunda buffer, which was supposed to be at the base of our spine, has since been removed, but it's the consequences of the properties of the organ kunda buffer. So there are some kind of traces which, you know, the ego, the me, my, mine, grasping, clasping. So, you know, understanding all of these dimensions really helps. I don't know, again, if that answers your question, Karen, or just gives you more stuff to think about, or?
Well, both are good.
Okay.
I don't know if it answered my question, but I'll think about it.
Okay. Other questions?
I've always been curious about Anulios.
So have I. You know.
We're talking about a moon. I figure we'll talk about the other one, maybe.
Yeah. Yeah, apparently, you know, according to the creation myth, when the comet Condor smashed into the earth and gouged the moon out, it actually gouged out 2 moons. And the other moon is known as Anulios, and we can't see it. It's hidden from our view. And, you know, Mr. Gurdjieff, the whole teachings are like this, where you come to something and it's like, I don't understand this. And you've really got to crack it and think about it. And I have to admit, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about Anulios. You know, some people have said that, you know, the moon, the earth, and Anulios, you know, the 3 centers, the 3 parts of our being, but I don't know. That's something I haven't really pursued with any kind of depth. Do you have any ideas, Ian, about Anulios?
Not that I care to say right now in front of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of think of it as representing, so there's the earth, and then the moon breaks off, and then something else breaks off that we can't see. And I think it has something, the only sense I've been able to make of it, and it's very preliminary, like I'm not holding to this, but like we have our being, and part of it breaks off into personality, and then there's always some kind of shadow thing about us that we're not aware of.
Yeah.
I think it's
that's actually a good, you know, place to begin thinking about it. You know, there's that part of ourselves that we're not aware of. What is that part of ourselves? We can't be aware of it because it's not it's beyond our awareness. Perhaps it's at such a lower level or whatever, but we know it's operational. I mean, it's the same with the ego. We cannot see the ego, but we can see the effects of the ego. We can, it's like we can't catch the ego, but we can catch the manifestations of the ego. So we can see it after the fact. We can't see it as it's occurring, but, once it's occurred, we can go, I think my ego was involved. And, so something similar to that. Yeah, well, that's a very interesting line of thought.
I like that idea too.
Yeah. Okay, we're almost out of time. Anything we'd like to go into a little bit more depth, perhaps next week, just off the top of your head? Any questions? Brian, you're moving?
Maybe can we touch on this, the sun's role in the very creation the same way that we touched on the moons today?
Sure. Yeah. So, I mean, just briefly, the sun is world 12. The sun is the equivalent of the awakened state. So when they talk about enlightenment, It's not something that happened 400 years ago in Western Europe. Within the awakened state, enlightenment, light, the sun. And yeah, we can discuss, I can discuss the whole ray of creation next week and begin to, explain where the sun fits into it, where everything fits into it, and understand that from a cosmological perspective. Okay, so that'll give me something to think about this week. Thank you for being here. And, we're finally getting a bit of spring weather here in Toronto, even though it got a little cold last week, but hopefully summer's coming. I guess the rest of you are already experiencing either spring or summer. It's been a little late this year. I'd like to thank you for being here, and I'd like to thank those on Facebook who have been watching, and I'd like to thank those who will be watching this when I get around to editing it, or just cutting bits and pieces, the beginning and the end, so to speak, out of it, and uploading it onto YouTube. Okay, so thank you for joining me today, and take care, and next week. Bye now.
Thank you, Allan.
Bye now.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.